مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. العالم أجمع يشاهد ما يجري. شاهد عددا غير مسبوق من الأميركيين وهم يصوتون في انتخاباتنا القومية في نوفمبر. وشاهد القادة في أنحاء البلد وهم يرفضون قبول النتائج المعتمدة من عدد من الولايات ورفعوا دعاوى قضائية أمام المحاكم، من بينها المحكمة العليا والتي رفضت مرارا وتكرارا. وشاهد إذ قام جمع من المتطرفين العنيفين بالتحريض من أكبر قادتنا بغزو الكونغرس أثناء قيامه بإخساء أصوات المجمع الانتخابي، وهددوا حياة نوابنا المنتخبين ورفاههم. قتل 5 أشخاص ومن بينهم رجال شرطة. كان أخطر هجوم على مؤسسات جمهورياتنا الديمقراطية خلال 160 عاما منذ الحرب الأهلية. كيف سيؤثر الهجوم العنيف على الكونغرس على الوضع أميركا في العالم؟ كيف سينظر خلفائنا وخصومنا إلى هذه الواقعة المروعة؟ كيف يمكن للرئيس الجديد جو بايدن أن يعيد الثقة في قوة جمهورياتنا؟ لمناقشة تبعات الدولية للهجوم العنيف على الكونغرس والأيام الأولى لسياسة إدارة بايدن الخارجية، يسرني أن أرحب بلجنتنا التي تدعم خبيري الأمن القومي دينيس روس ووان سراتي. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. The transition is done and we have started a new administration, which means there is a new team confronting challenges around the world on behalf of the United States. Let's close the book on the Trump foreign policy and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and then we're going to turn to the new challenges and the new approaches of the Biden administration. Gentlemen, Dennis, Juan, thanks for joining us this morning. In his final days, Secretary of State Pompeo made news with a flurry of last-minute policy statements on Iran, the new base of al-Qaeda, restoring Cuba as a terrorist state, designating Houthi Yemen rebels as terrorist organization. Why the flurry in his final days, and what of these last-minute statements by Secretary of Pompeo really matters?
Well, I think the explanation for the flurry is that I think that Secretary of State Pompeo wants to put his stamp on a number of different issues. I think many of these issues also will appeal to a Republican base that I think he's interested in maintaining a connection to and potentially building on for the future. I also think that he's trying to create some constraints on what the new administration can do. Some of these moves, I think outlining the connection of Iran to al-Qaeda is something that is designed, I think, also to make it clear what sort of a state, remind everybody what sort of a state the Islamic Republic is. I think this might have been better done earlier. It would look less political if it had been done earlier. So I think in some ways it has less of a long-term policy impact than it might have had it been done earlier. I think the decision on the Houthis is not well considered, precisely because you have a country that's on the edge of famine, and this may create a chilling effect on many of those who provide humanitarian assistance, given the fear that they could fall victim to American sanctions. I think also the designating Cuba, putting Cuba on the terrorism list may make a lot of sense politically in South Florida. I wonder whether or not there's the kind of basis on which to do so. I guess in sum, my view is if these were really designed to be serious policy initiatives, it should have been done earlier so they wouldn't look so political. It doesn't mean that everything he's done at this stage is necessarily political, but I'm afraid some steps that might make sense from a policy standpoint are going to be harder to portray that way because of the time in which these were done.
And Juan, what of these do you think really matters? What is going to last into the new administration?
Well, it's a great question, Rob, because I think the flurry of these activities at the end of the administration, in some ways, are intended to tie the hands of the Biden administration. You've certainly seen that with respect to the Iran-related actions and sanctions over the past few months, not just at the end of the administration. And so the Iran quite a bit because it does begin to constrain what it is that the Biden administration can do with respect to negotiations, with respect to unwinding of sanctions. And so those are significant. But Dennis's point, the flurry of these quite significant actions, frankly, at the tail end of the administration really does put a political tinge on those actions and actually calls into question their legitimacy. And to a certain extent, something like the state sponsorship designation of Cuba, which again is a very serious move. We only have 3 countries left on that list, Iran, North Korea, Syria, to put another country on as Sudan was taken off, as Iraq was taken off several years ago, is a dramatic move, and one that calls into question the legitimacy of that list, first of all. And secondly, I think it draws attention by the Biden administration to actually unwind that relatively quickly. And so it runs counter to the desire that I think Secretary Pompeo would want, which is to isolate the Cuban regime for a lot of various and malicious activity, no doubt. But it really does undermine the longevity of those policies. So in just one note, Rob, and I think Dennis would reflect the same, when I was in government, we transitioned out. There were some big decisions to be made at the end of an administration, and we actually forestalled those decisions. We didn't make those decisions precisely to allow the incoming administration to make those hard choices. We did that in the Bush administration on Afghanistan and on a few other issues that were handed then to the Obama administration to handle, understanding that the complications and consequences would be many weeks, many months, many years to come, and the new administration really had to own it and be responsible for it. That's really not what's happening here. It's a flurry of activity that is now in some ways tying the hands of the Biden administration and forcing them to react to the consequences.
So let me ask both of you to sum up, in your views, Secretary Mike Pompeo's legacy as chief foreign policy official of the United States, Secretary of State. Dennis?
I do think that he has done more to at least apply economic pressure to the Iranians. And even if it didn't change Iran's behavior, it certainly has put them in a position where they want sanctions relief. I do think that Secretary of State Pompeo should get credit for that. I think he should also get some credit for, I think, highlighting the nature of the threat that China has created. I think those are sort of the more positive sides of his legacy. I would say that the negative side of the legacy is, maybe it was difficult in this administration, particularly given the president. I don't think our alliances are in very good shape, and I don't think, even though he may have said he may have wanted to preserve them, his capacity to sustain and manage the alliances was pretty limited. And I don't think he leaves with a legacy of having done a lot to improve the American brand on the world stage. Our soft power under this administration has largely disappeared. And again, maybe the Secretary of State couldn't have done a whole lot about that, but he certainly didn't do very much to promote it either.
Secretary Pompeo in his time at the State Department, recall he was at the CIA to start the administration. I think Secretary Pompeo will be known for confronting hard realities in American foreign policy and rupturing orthodoxies that had long been held. And I think that will be a positive long-term impression, I think, of the Pompeo term at the State Department. Things like Middle East peace, reconceptualizing what that looks like. To Dennis's point, confronting China, understanding that there is a challenge underway in terms of international norms and standards. So I think that the kind of muscular attention to the confrontation of hard realities will be something that he's very proud of, and that he'll be known for. On the flip side, to Dennis's point, he will be known for trying to put a diplomatic face and packaging around America first. And at the tail end of the administration, Secretary Pompeo has been tweeting quite a bit about America first and redefining that from a diplomatic perspective. The hard part, though, is America first by much of the world has been interpreted as a unilateral, muscular, go-it-alone approach, whereas Secretary Pompeo has very much tried to define it in new alliance terms, in the creation of new alliances and revising and reforming old ones. But I don't think that will necessarily be seen as something that he was able to accomplish, and it certainly won't be seen as the most positive element of his legacy.
All right, so let's transition now from the Trump administration foreign policy to this new moment that we're in. Let's explain to our viewers what's going on right now, this moment of confirmation. Though President Biden has named an entire group of foreign policy officials, very few of them are in their positions yet, and some of them might take quite a while to be in their positions. What is going on? Who is running American foreign policy right now? Dennis?
At the beginning of every administration, the confirmation process obviously takes some time. Usually the most senior cabinet officials are confirmed very quickly, but getting the second tier undersecretaries, assistant secretaries, that can actually take months. So at the beginning of an administration, a lot of the locus of decision-making goes to the White House because those are people who are in place from the very beginning. Assuming that confirmations take quickly of the senior cabinet positions, certainly in the State Department, Secretary of State can be doing things, but the Secretary of State won't have a lot of his appointments available very quickly. So here again, it puts kind of a premium on working very closely with the White House, figuring out exactly what the Secretary of State can be doing on his own, who he has with him, who can be helping to implement the policies. But I think in the early stages, in my experience, you often see that it's the White House that takes the lead on many policies and makes sure that not only the tone is set, the concept is being laid out, but also the implementation is taking place. Oftentimes, if the White House can't be doing it, given just the limitations on the size, you are then having people from the different departments, state or defense, who are not necessarily people who've been confirmed, but people who are still in their positions. Usually, those are people that you can count on to carry out the policies of the administration. Because this has not been what we can call as a friendly takeover, a friendly transition, that may add to some of the difficulties this administration will face early on. It will certainly add to the burden that those who are in their positions, like the National Security Advisor, like the Secretary of State, it'll add to the burden they have to ensure that everyone understands exactly what the Biden policy is. Messages are very clear to foreign governments, put a premium on a very intensive level of communications early on.
And so just to remind everyone, officials in the White House do not need Senate confirmation. It's officials out in the agencies, out in the departments. They're the ones that need Senate confirmation. So Juan, you were there. You've been on these early days of an administration. How are decisions getting made in the first few weeks?
Rob, I think Dennis is absolutely right. I think what the Biden administration, they've signaled very clearly the core professionals that they're going to have in the National Security Council, the National Economic Council, the policy advisors who sit in the White House. And so part of this will be translating a lot of the campaign policies, doctrines, promises, and the transition plans that have been developed into actual policies. And what you've seen traditionally is administrations wanting to move very quickly. They'll usually have a 100-day plan.
All right, when we come back after our break, we're going to look at what Joe Biden is going to do first on his list of priorities for U.S. foreign policy in 2021. In just a moment with our guests. After Inauguration Day, Donald Trump has a company to go back to. But what about Vice President Mike Pence? On his fate, history isn't very clear. Of our 48 vice presidents, only 19 have even attempted a subsequent run at the presidency, and only 6 have won the White House outright. It's better to have been vice president than not, but it's definitely not a sure thing. Before Joe Biden did it, the last vice president to eventually win the presidency was George H.W. Bush. Before him, it was Richard Nixon. Since Nixon, 3 former vice presidents won the Democratic nomination, but all lost their races. Hubert Humphrey, Walter Mondale, and Al Gore. Timing, it seems, is everything. The pendulum of American politics swings back and forth between the need for new, fresh faces and the comfort of tried and true political veterans. Will Pence time it right? Let's check back in 2024. All right, gentlemen, let's look at Joe Biden's foreign policy priorities. What's the first order of business, or the first few order of business, that Joe Biden will address once he gets into the Oval Office when it comes to national security and foreign policy?
I think one of the things that will be keen to Joe Biden is to demonstrate that the U.S. is a good global citizen again. So it means day one, as he said, he rejoins the Paris Climate Accord. We go back into the World Health Organization because we're still in the midst of a pandemic. He will want to show we will assume our responsibilities as a leader on the world stage. And we will also rekindle who we are, reestablish who we are. As Juan was referring to, the horrific events at the Capitol. This is a citadel democracy, the kind of image of the United States that one would never, ever have believed they could have seen. But the whole world watched that. And I think Biden has talked about having a summit of the democracies. He said this during the campaign. I think now there may be even more of an imperative to do that, to reinforce the imagery of democracy and our commitment to it. The whole idea of soft power will be something he wants to reestablish. He, better than most, given his experience, understands that soft power without hard power has no real effect. But hard power without soft power also is very limited. Soft power is what is a source of attraction. Others are attracted to us because of who we are, the values we represent. That means when we establish an objective, it's easier for others to line up behind it. So I think here again, we're going to see someone who feels the need to reestablish the image of an America that believes in certain values, an America that is committed to the global commons, an America that is committed to its allies as well, an America that understands its responsibilities on the world stage.
Democrats critiqued President Trump for undoing the major achievements of the Obama administration. In this case, for example, the Iran nuclear deal. Now, both of you said that it'll be a high priority for President Biden to change both the tone and the substance from what we had under President Trump. How do you go about doing that? How do you let elections have consequences in foreign policy without undermining the sense of American credibility and the sense of continuity of American foreign policy? If the new administration doesn't like a lot of what President Trump did, how does it avoid the same charge that it leveled at President Trump?
I do think there is a way for President Biden to explain where he differs by putting himself in the tradition of Republican and Democratic presidents from throughout the whole post-World War II era. He can basically talk about what the two President Bushes did that were consistent with American foreign policy premises. He can talk about, in a sense, the tradition of bipartisanship in foreign policy. He can wrap himself in the principle of what have been key foundational elements of American foreign policy, with the Trump administration seemingly the odd one out. So he can avoid this image that he's simply reversing Trump as if he's continuing the pattern of the pendulum swing, and instead he can cloak himself in what is a bipartisan tradition of what America's role in the world is. I think that way he kind of squares the circle.
Okay, well, we're going to stop there. We've run out of time. I do want to thank you, Juan, and you, Dennis, for helping to explain this complex transition from one administration to another in terms of American foreign policy. Thank you both very much. Joe Biden assumes the presidency at a moment of unusual global uncertainty. No, there is no great war underway. No, armies and navies of the great powers are not marching or steaming into position to face each other. But the uncertainty of the moment is palpable. Some is born of the pandemic and the race against time underway in many countries around the world. Will the pandemic, including its new, more virulent strains, overwhelm health systems before enough vaccines can be manufactured, delivered, and distributed to reverse the curve? In a few places, Israel, Estonia, governments are winning the race. But in too many places, America included, we are not. Some of the uncertainty is born of the global economic recession, which has attacked even some of the strongest economies with a vengeance, leaving broken families, collapsed communities, and trillions of dollars of debt in its wake around the world. And some of this uncertainty is born of the shocks to America's standing as a global leader, to self-inflicted wounds to its unique role as defender of liberty, beacon to oppressed peoples, and organizer of powerful coalitions on everything from protecting our environment to arranging free and open trade to countering the egregious behavior of bad actors in Tehran, Pyongyang, and elsewhere. It is absolutely true that America is not responsible for the world's problems, nor is it responsible for their solutions. But without American leadership, our example, our convening power, our ingenuity, problems will worsen and solutions will prove elusive for us all. These aren't the most urgent problems Joe Biden faces once he takes over the Oval Office. Those concern the lives of millions of Americans at risk at this very moment because of the faulty process of vaccine distribution and the uneven policies of masking, restrictions, and lockdowns in places across the country. But these are among the most important challenges he does face. Like George H.W. Bush, who came to the White House as a former vice president after decades in public life, it is reassuring that Mr. Biden has chosen a team of familiar faces, people in whom he has the assurance of familiarity and the confidence of experience. Did I applaud every initiative some of them pursued when they were last in office, usually in the Obama administration? No, I did not. But do I take comfort that they will work as a team to represent what I hope will be Joe Biden's steady hand on the rudder of American foreign policy? Yes, I do. I hope the Senate moves expeditiously with confirmation hearings and fulfills its constitutional duty to advise and, when appropriate, consent. There's work to be done. Let's get going. بهذا نصل لنهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول الهجوم العنيف على الديمقراطية الأميركية، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ InsideWashington أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. سأراكم الأسبوع المقبل وإلى أن ألقاكم. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.